Jeff is in Oregon looking for gold. He said he has found a little bit of gold, but not the 5-pound nugget. And we are here, and we have treasure before us here in the Word of God. We don't need to go looking for it in a stream. So why don't we go ahead and open in prayer and get started. Heavenly Father, we're thankful for your word. Thankful that we can look at it and study it and learn from it. Thank you that from it we know how to be saved and how to live the way you want us to live as ambassadors for you in this world. Pray for this time. Pray that it would be profitable and instructive and a good time of fellowship and digging into your word. In your name we pray. Amen. We're going to be looking at the book of Joel. The book of Joel. And just this morning I was reading in the book of Job in 21:7. Job asks a question. Why do the wicked still live, continue on, also become very powerful? And I don't know about you, but sometimes I think about that question as well. When you see the wicked seem to be thriving and the righteous seem to be suffering. Joel is going to address that. We're going to see what God says through Joel about that. Now, we're in what we call prophetic literature books. We started with the book of Isaiah, which were in the major prophets. And then a couple weeks ago, Jeff started in Hosea, which is then the start of the 12 minor prophets. And they're minor because they're shorter. And in this case, Joel is just 3 chapters. In Chafer's systematic theology, he points out that the Old Testament includes 7 major prophetic themes. We have prophecies regarding Gentiles, regarding the nation of Israel. We have the dispersions and regatherings of Israel. We have the advent of the Messiah, the Great Tribulation, the Day of the Lord, and the Messianic Kingdom. What we'll see in Joel is that he's going to work on bringing information about the Day of the Lord. Now, on those themes, can you think of any of the books that we've talked about so far that have dealt with the Messianic Kingdom? Anybody remember talking about that? Daniel talks about more so maybe the Great Tribulation and the 70 weeks in the last week. Well, I'm thinking of the prophetic books that we covered. How about Isaiah? If you remember in Isaiah, he talks about the Messianic Kingdom, talks about the wolf and the lamb lying down together and some things. If you recall, we haven't studied it here yet, but the book of Jonah, what is the theme of Jonah? But who does he go to? Nineveh. So in that one, he's dealing with a Gentile nation. So let's see. All right, if you look at your notes, the title of the book is Joel. And that means Yahweh is God. And it's taken its title from verse 1, where it talks about the prophet that received the message of the book from the Lord. So Yahweh is God. So kind of keep that in mind as we work our way through the book. Okay, an introduction and title. Natural disaster brought about by God's sovereign design is a preview of the judgment to come. In that future time of judgment, God will destroy his enemies, but will bring blessing on those who faithfully obey him. All right. The author. Now, the authorship of the book is attributed to Joel, son of Pethuel. And this is all we know about him, even though there are other Joels mentioned in the Old Testament. This is the only one that's the son of Pethuel. And so there's no other information about him than that. All right, take a look at the date and setting. Now, in some of the other books, we're given a clear time frame where it's like when this king was reigning or when this thing happened. We don't have that in the book of Joel. So the dating is kind of like all over the place. There's those that want to put it before the exile, put it after the exile, during the exile. And they all are picking on different parts within Joel to say, well, when this happened, we think this is what was going on. And what I was reading through, it seemed like the best case is to put the date of Joel around 835 BC, 840 BC. And that places it right in the time when it's during the beginning of the reign of Joash. Well, under the protection of Jehoiada, the high priest. And in 2 Kings 11, we kind of, to see that what's going on there is that he was a baby at the time that there was some upheaval, and all of his brothers and sisters were killed, but he was rescued by the nurse, taken into hiding until he was old enough to kind of be put on the throne as the age of 7, but he was being helped by Jehoiada, the high priest, during his reign. Because what we see in Joel is it doesn't really talk about a king being in place. It talks about elders, and so that's kind of very fitting for a time when there really wasn't a king in the way we would normally see that. Theme and purpose. The key theme of Joel is the day of the Lord, or the day of Yahweh. It's going to be a future time of unparalleled retribution. It's coming for those who do not trust in the Lord. An invitation is offered to all who respond in repentance before it's too late. Okay. Christ. Where is Christ seen? You see that Christ will be the one that judges the nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat. We'll get to that in chapter 3. So there's not really a big emphasis on who the Messiah is like we saw in Isaiah or that. But we do come across quite a contribution to the Bible. And Joel was the first prophet to develop the important biblical theme of the day of the Lord. And chronologically, if you put the book of Joel at around the 840, it's the second. Obadiah comes first, then Joel, and we move on from there. And of those books of prophecy, 17 times the phrase is mentioned of the day of the Lord. Starting with Obadiah, but he only mentions it once. And in Joel, we have 5 of those. And so he definitely hits on it more than the rest. So that was one of the big parts of the contribution. We also have parts of Joel, passages of Joel that are quoted in the New Testament. We have in Acts chapter 2, Peter quotes from Joel 2 in his sermon on the day of Pentecost. We also have Jesus in his Olivet Discourse, references events in Joel 2:10, 31, and 3:15 as signs for his second coming. So while we talked a little bit about the day of the Lord, what is it? First off, what it is not. It is not the same as the Lord's Day. As J. Vernon McGee points out, there is a vast difference in meaning, and they are no more alike than a chestnut horse and a horse chestnut. So, we know that the Lord's Day, that's today, we call this the Lord's Day, where we get together for worship. But the day of the Lord is nothing like that. It's going to be a time of judgment. The Old Testament prophets spoke of the day of the Lord as both near historical events as well as far future end-time events involving God's wrath. So there will be like little, if you might say, like previews of the day of the Lord, but the final day of the Lord comes in the far future. And we're getting closer. Now, the New Testament writers, they applied it to Christ's judgment, ending the tribulation period, and to the consummating judgment after the millennium, ushering in the new earth. Outline. Pretty simple for this. We have the day of the Lord in retrospect and the day of the Lord in prospect. All right, let's go ahead and, if you haven't already, turn to the book of Joel. Let's open up the book of Joel and get started with verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Joel, the son of Pethuel. What you'll notice here is it doesn't specifically say that Joel wrote it, but it is attributed to him as the author, and he probably did write it, but what this verse is communicating is the content of the book. This is a prophecy that came to Joel. And we also mentioned that there isn't really any other information we have. We don't know who Pethuel is, and so we can't really say who, was he a priest? We don't know anything else about him. It starts right off, verse 2. Hear this, O elders, and listen, all inhabitants of the land. Has anything like this happened in your day or in your father's day? Tell your sons about it, and let your sons tell their sons, and their sons the next generation. So right off we see important word. Hear this, listen, or give ear. So it should get the attention of the reader that what follows is important. We also note that the message is not just for the elders, but what? It's for all the inhabitants of the land. And they need to what? What are they supposed to do with the message? Yeah, pass it on, to be passed on, to be passed on. So it's not just passing it on, but communicate the importance of then having that passed on even more. All right. Verse 4. We get into some interesting stuff. What the gnawing locust has left, the swarming locust has eaten. And what the swarming locust has left, the creeping locust has eaten. And what the creeping locust has left, the stripping locust has eaten. All right, let's take a moment and test our group knowledge. What are locusts? And where or how are they mentioned in the Bible? Okay, where are bug experts? They're like, yes, grasshopper, Peggy. Yeah. Well, where have we seen locust plagues in the Bible? Egypt. It was number 8, I think it was. Yeah. What else do we know about locusts? Very destructive. They clear everything in their path. Yeah. David. Mm-hmm. Oh, come on. There's. Think of John the Baptist. Yep, you can eat them. I don't recall ever trying one myself, but they can eat them. Now, how about this? Has locust swarms, plagues, or whatever been eradicated? No. I was looking up to see when the latest one was, 2018 to 2020. Wasn't quite a plague, but there were swarms of locusts that were definitely doing damage. Now, because it happened then, you know what it was blamed on? Climate change. Now, the fact that it's been happening since early recorded history, I'm sure we can't think about that. Now, I did run across a very interesting article. I was looking this up. December 1915, there's a 37-page article in National Geographic. It's called Jerusalem's Locust Plague, being a description of the recent locust influx into Palestine and comparing same with ancient locust invasions as narrated in the Old Testament history book, the Bible. And it's fascinating reading through it, but I wanted to just read the first paragraph, and I want you to tell me why it sounds familiar. Hear this, ye elders, and give ear, all ye inhabitants of the land. Has this ever happened in your day, or in the days of your fathers? Concerning it to your children tell ye the story, and your children to their children, and their children to the generation following. That which was left by the creeping locust hath the swarming locust eaten, and that which was left by the swarming locust hath the grass locust eaten, and that which was left by the grass locust hath the corn locust eaten. Sound familiar? Yes, the author pulls this right out of the book of Joel, and in more of it later on, he'll quote Joel as well as Exodus with the plagues in Egypt, making a lot of comparison. And there's some interesting parallel between what is being described. Oh, Bill, have you read this? Yeah. Yeah. And he will use nature, elements of nature to do that. Yeah. Good. So there'll be parts I want to pull out of this article a little later as well. but I was going to mention on eating locusts. A few ate them roasted, describing the taste as delicious, especially the female full of eggs. So next time you have locusts come through, you might want to gather some and try them out, or not. All right, locusts. We're still dealing with locust. Oh man, there's some things in that article. All right. What we see is the locusts, as Dave pointed out, they're very destructive. And, this describes these waves of locusts. And when just reading that, we don't really think the time involved. And one of the things pointed out in this article, at that time, the locust infestation went from March to October. So it isn't like, it's a day or two and it's done. Because they come, they lay their eggs, the eggs hatch, and it's like the cycle just goes through. And that possibly what is being described here is the different stages of the locust as they go from a larvae stage to just a crawling stage, and then finally they get their wings and they're off. Now, in the next section that follows, we're going to be looking at some words like wail, mourn, and weep. So pay attention to those as we cover that. It gives you an idea of how bad this is. In verse 5 we have, awake, drunkards, and weep, and wail, all you wine drinkers, on account of the sweet wine that is cut off from your mouth. So why would the drunkards wail? What's happened in their case? Exactly. Yeah. They have not, if they're addicted to wine, it's not going to be available. I can't really relate to that, but then I thought of, what if instead it was a destruction of, say, coffee plants? I was thinking, okay, I could see wailing that. Now, the awake part might be a little more difficult, but the wailing and the mourning I could get. Yeah, exactly. It's cut off. So the destruction, the locusts don't just eat, the wheat or the barley. I mean, they come through, and if there's a plant with a leaf, it's fair game. Verse 6, describing a little more, it says, for a nation has invaded my land, mighty and without number. Its teeth are the teeth of a lion, and it has the fangs of a lioness. And the locust will eat a lot of the not just the soft leaves, but they'll even go after some bark and things like that. Verse 7, it has made my vine a waste, and my fig trees splinters. It has splintered them bare and cast them away. Their branches have become white. Now, as I was reading through this article, he points out, and this is a firsthand of looking at what is happening with the locust in 1915. It says, they ate away the tender parts. This is describing a fig tree. They ate away the tender parts, leaving a perfect skeleton of the large, broad leaves. But soon these too were devoured, and usually after one day's work, the tree stood naked of any leaves, with nothing but the hard, unripe fruit protruding stiffly from the branches. When the daintier morsels were gone, the bark was eaten off the young topmost branches, which after exposed to the sun, bleached snow white. That's exactly what is described. So we're seeing what Joel describes here was actually eyewitnessed in that time. Now we have a comparison here in verse 8. It says, like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the bridegroom of, wail like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the bridegroom of her youth. So why would a virgin girded with sackcloth wail? I think that's the implication is that her bridegroom has died. Now, this is where it's kind of helpful to get into a little study of the hermeneutics of the time, because we're very strict with our definition of virgin, and back then it was a little broader, and it could mean any young woman who is not yet conceived. So the picture here is it could be that she was married and her husband died before they had any children. Or it could be that she was still in the betrothal period. But we can see that a lady in this position would not be happy about it. And so they're comparing it as, he's saying, picture how this woman would respond to the situation she is in. You're essentially in that same situation with how you need to respond to what's going on around you. And of course, we don't, we're not as expressive in those ways. We don't put on sackcloth when we're mourning, so it's a little harder to make the connection on I guess we're more stoics, or more, we internalize and then have other health issues because we don't express our emotions. All right. What else is going on? Verse 9. The grain offering and the drink offerings are cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests mourn, the ministers of the Lord. So, here we have the grain offering and the drink offering cut off. Now, the grain offering and the drink offering. So these were part of the daily ritual sacrifices or offerings made in the temple. In the morning, they were to have a lamb, and they were to have a grain offering and a drink offering. Does anybody know the ingredients of a grain offering? Basically two things: flour and oil. Now there is a third sometimes added to it, and that's frankincense. So, grain offering, there's no flour, there's no oil, can't have the grain offering. The drink offering is wine. No grapes, no wine, no drink offering. So it's impacting now what the priests are supposed to be doing daily in the temple. Once in the morning, once in the evening, they can't do it. Their jobs are impacted, and they are now called to mourn. These are not good times. And Just reading on, we see the field is ruined, the land mourns, for the grain is ruined, and the new wine dries up, fresh oil fails. So those ingredients for the offerings are gone. Be ashamed, O farmers. Wail, O vine dressers, for the wheat and the barley, because the harvest of the field is destroyed. The vine dries up, the fig tree fails, the pomegranate, the palm also, and the apple tree. All the trees of the field dry up. Indeed, rejoicing dries up from the sons of men. All right, then, verse 13, more of showing sort of the outward grieving they're supposed to do. Gird yourself with sackcloth and lament, O priests. Wail, O ministers of the altar. Come, spend the night in sackcloth, O ministers of my God. For the grain offering and the drink offering are withheld from the house of your God. So again, that whole interruption of what they're supposed to be doing. Verse 14, though, what is the response? It says, consecrate a fast, proclaim a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land to the house of the Lord your God, and cry out to the Lord. As Bill was pointing out, we need to turn. It's God that needs to be the one that we turn our attention to when these things are happening. In verse 15, we have the first mention of the day of the Lord. It says, alas for that day, for the day of the Lord is near, and it will come as destruction from the Almighty. So you can see he's tying it in. He's painted a picture of the first part of destruction, of devastation, of how the locusts have just ruined the land, interrupted the drunkards, interrupted the offerings. And that is a preview of what's going to happen at the day of the Lord. Now in verses 16 through 20, it goes through and it talks about how now it's more of a description of a drought that has taken place. Has not food been cut off before our eyes, gladness and joy from the house of our God? The seeds shrivel under their clods, the storehouses are desolate, the barns are torn down, for the grain is dried up. How the beasts groan, the herds of cattle wander aimlessly, because there's no pasture for them. Even the flocks of sheep suffer. To you, O Lord, I cry, for fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness, and flame has burned up all the trees of the field. Even the beasts of the field pant for you, for the water brooks are dried up, and fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness. As I was reading that, I was thinking of how when there's a drought around here, California, we see wildfires that just take off and spread because everything's a tinder, just ready to go up in flames. So we could see, there they had drought for a while, and a lightning strike or something started a fire. It would just clear the fields and take away all the pasture for the cattle and the sheep to be able to graze. Now we've looked at the day of the Lord in retrospect. Now we're going to look to the day of the Lord in prospect. Joel is going to warn them about what is to come. In verse 1 of chapter 2, it starts with, blow a trumpet in Zion and sound an alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. Surely it is near. In the Hebrew, it's blast a shofar. Now, in their time, trumpets were used for various different purposes. They could be used to sound a call to come worship. When they were traveling in the wilderness, they had different calls for whether it's time to head off, break camp, time to go. Obviously, they had trumpets that would sound the alarm if there were enemies coming. Here, it's not a call to worship, but a warning of what's to come. He really wants to get their attention by blowing a trumpet in their face. Now, in verse 2, we start with the details of the destruction. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. As the dawn is spreading over the mountains, so there is a great and mighty people that there has never been anything like it, nor will there be again after it to the years of many generations. A fire consumes before them, and behind them a flame burns. The land is like the Garden of Eden before them, but a desolate wilderness behind them, and nothing at all escapes them. Their appearance is like the appearance of horses, and like a war horse, so they run. With a noise as of chariots, they leap on the tops of the mountains, like the crackling of a flame of fire consuming the stubble, like a mighty people arranged for battle. Before them, people are in anguish, all faces turn pale. We'll read to verse 9. They run like mighty men, they climb the wall like soldiers, and they each march in line, nor do they deviate from their paths. They do not crowd each other, they march everyone in his path. When they burst through the defenses, they do not break ranks. They rush on the city, they run on the wall, they climb into the houses, they enter through the windows like a thief. Now, who is this? Is this locusts again? Is this an army? And the answer to that is yes, I believe so. It's a lot of this description is exactly what happened in the locust plague, but it's a preview of what will come with a human army. There's another section I wanted to read. In this description of the plague in 1915, first it starts in this section, it says, swarms of locusts had flown overhead in such thick clouds as to obscure the sun for the time being. So now we have darkness. However, before they were seen, a loud noise produced by the flapping of myriads of locust wings was heard, described as resembling the distant rumble of waves, or as St. John has it, the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running into battle, Revelation 9:9. And then he actually puts in a quote, a day of cloud and thick darkness as dusk spreads over the mountains, a people many and bold, from Joel 2:2. So they're seeing that this is, again, exactly how that's happening. And then we also have this description from an eyewitness. It says, disaster. So this is referring to the locust plague again. Disastrous as they were in the country, equally obnoxious they became about the homes, crawling up thick upon the walls and squeezing in through cracks of closed doors or windows, entering the very dwelling rooms. When unable to find an entrance, they often scaled the walls to the roofs and then got into the houses by throwing themselves into the open courts, such as most Oriental houses are built around. Women frantically swept the walls and roofs of their houses, but to no avail. So what they were experiencing was exactly what was being described in like 7, 8, and 9 as how the locusts were going. They even mentioned one lady that she made the mistake of going out in the midst of this, and when she came back, she had 110 locusts in her skirt. So, stay indoors, but even then it wasn't safe. Now, verse 10, we have a verse that Jesus recalls in Matthew 24:29. Before them the earth quakes, the heaven trembles, the sun and the moon grow dark, and the stars lose their brightness. And in Matthew 24:29, as Jesus is describing this, he says, "But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken." We also see a similar in Joel 3:15, which is also what Jesus could be pulling from. Now, what to do? If we get them down to verse 12, "Yet even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, and with fasting, weeping, and mourning, and rend your heart and not your garments. Now return to the Lord your God." I'm just going to stop there for now. It just reminds me, at the start of it says, "Yet even now." Reminds me of all the places in the New Testament where it says, "But God." That we have things that aren't good, and then we have "but God" and how he deals with it. So here we have all of this destruction, things going on, and yet even now there's a call from the Lord, "Return to me." A call to repent and get your heart right. And then demonstrate that in a proper outward response. It's like Psalm 51:17, when David's confessing all his sins, he tells us that the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. So we see Joel is saying, rend your hearts, not your garments. You know, that picture is, yeah, you can tear your garment to show that you're mourning, but he's saying, no, God wants you to rend your heart. And that's a message for all of us, is that when we not just to come before God outwardly, put on a show, make us look good. God wants our heart to be wholly his. Because he says, all your heart. Now, you know, we starting in 13b, we see the rationale for repentance, and that is the character of God. As he says, now return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness, and relenting of evil. Who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, even a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God. Now this should sound a little bit familiar because we've dealt with this in Exodus chapter 34. Verse 6 with Moses, it says, then the Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord God, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished, visiting the iniquity of fathers on their children and on the grandchildren to the third and fourth generations. Now, as Joel quotes this, he leaves that last part out. Why do you think he didn't go into that? Good? Mm-hmm. And what have they gone through already? Yes. That part is already done, so he doesn't need to reiterate it. Exactly. Good. All right. We're going to skip down to verse 18. Kind of in the next section, or in that section, there's more instruction for how they should respond. Then 18, then the Lord will be zealous for his land, and he will have pity on his people. The Lord will answer and say to his people, behold, I am going to send you grain, new wine, and oil, and you will be satisfied in full with them. And I will never again make you a reproach among the nations. So here we have restoring the ingredients for what? The grain offering and the drink offering. Yeah. And he's doing this because of his name. He's not doing it for the people, but he's doing it for himself because he's jealous of his name. And he doesn't want his name to be tarnished because of this. Just a beautiful picture of restoration going on. All right. Now, moving along quickly. Skip over to 28. I have to get to this because it's what's quoted in Acts chapter 2. It will come about after this that I will pour out my Spirit on all mankind, and your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. Even on the male and female servants I will pour out my Spirit in those days. Now, if we look at Acts chapter 2, Peter quotes this on the day of Pentecost to explain why the people are speaking in tongues and showing signs of something unusual happening. And to be careful with what actually Peter says, because he doesn't say that the Joel passage is fulfilled. And this is like a pre-fulfillment of it. He's saying, he says, this is what was spoken of through Joel the prophet. So he's commenting on what Joel said. And it shall be in the last days, God says, I will pour forth my Spirit on all mankind. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even on my bond slaves, and both men and women, I will in those days pour forth my Spirit. So we see that Peter is pulling from Joel to highlight what will happen when the Spirit is poured out on mankind. We have another in this section here in verse 32, verse that Paul quotes in Romans chapter 10, verse 13. In that section there, he quotes the part where it says, whoever will call on the name of the Lord will be saved. And so we have the idea here, that God's not going to judge without also providing salvation for those that will call on him. All right, we're going to jump to chapter 3 real quick here. Verses 1 and 2, and this is, the time has come to restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem and judge the nations. Walter Kaiser notes that this section here, Joel chapter 3, 1 through 21, became the classic passage for the rest of the Old Testament on God's final judgment on all nations. It also became the classic statement of the blessed result for the people of God. They would possess an exceedingly fertile land, enriched with fountains of running water and dripping with wine and milk. And to climax it all, Yahweh would personally dwell in Zion. So verse 1, chapter 3. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Then I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my inheritance Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided up my land. So, God's no longer going to put up with what has been happening to his people. Now, Jehoshaphat means Yahweh judges. And so when it's talking about the valley of Jehoshaphat, it could be also translated the valley of the decision of judgment. All right. And what is that going to look like? If we skip down to verse 9, this is an all-out global call to arms. It is a time for war and not a time for peace. This is where the summons will go out. All the enemies of God will be gathered together. Verse 9 says, proclaim this among the nations. Prepare a war. Rouse the mighty men. Let all the soldiers draw near. Let them come up. You can see this is definitely a call to arms. And then verse 10, very interesting. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am a mighty man. On that last part, it's not just the soldiers that are called to arms. It's the little guy. So even the weak are being recruited to be soldiers in this. But now the first part was beating the plowshares into swords. Now that may sound familiar, but then it's like, wait a second, isn't it the other way? And yeah, in Isaiah 2:4, Isaiah says, and he will judge between the nations and will render decisions for many peoples. And they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hook. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. So we have Isaiah picturing what will happen after this. So first they take their plowshares, hammer them into swords, and then when the war is over, they can go back and hammer them back into plowshares. Anybody know what a plowshare is? I had to look this up. It's an iron implement used in agriculture, and it's like a hoe. And apparently it'd have enough iron that you could then get a sword out of it. Where the pruning hook, they're saying, is more like a little sickle on a wooden handle. So there's not a lot of iron in that, and so that's why you only get a spear out of it. So, but you can see it's time when you're arming up, you're even taking what would be your instruments of peace, agriculture, and you're turning them into elements of war. Now, it won't go well with them. We'll go ahead and read 15 because that's also what Jesus refers to. The sun and the moon grow dark and the stars lose their brightness. All these massive armies will come to fight against Jerusalem, and they will be defeated, utterly and completely defeated. And then 18, we see in that day the mountains will drip with sweet wine. So this is now the restoration. War's done, enemies are cleared out. Don't need to go into all that gory detail, all the blood. We get to the good stuff here. The mountains will drip with sweet wine. The hills will flow with milk. And all the brooks of Judah will flow with wine. And a spring will go forth from the house of the Lord to water the valley of Shittim. Egypt will become a waste. Edom will become a desolate wilderness because of the violence done to the sons of Judah, in whose land they have shed innocent blood. But Judah will be inhabited forever, and Jerusalem for all generations. I will avenge their blood, which I have not avenged, for the Lord dwells in Zion. So dealing with all this destruction, he brings it back and he says, but it's going to turn out well for those who have rend their hearts and not their garments, for those who have called on the name of the Lord. So that's a message to all of us as well, that if we've never done that, this is the time. And this is the time. So, any questions? That's in view, yeah. And also there's another battle at the end of the millennium. But Armageddon is at the end of the tribulation. Yes. It actually can apply to both. Yeah. But then it's like you have the Armageddon. It's definitely pictured in a lot of this with the armies coming together to fight. But then that will happen again at the end of the millennium. So that's the consummating one, and that's when the new heavens and the new earth will be brought in. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and close. People are ready to come in. Thank you for listening. Heavenly Father, again, we're grateful for your word and what we can learn from it. We're thankful that we can gather here on this Lord's Day, especially on this Father's Day where we honor our fathers. And we want to pray for Pastor Jason as he brings the message of encouragement as well as challenge for the men. Thank you for just how you watch over us throughout this day and throughout this week. In your name we pray, amen.